Calm waters can conceal chaos, and survival often hinges on mere seconds. From a massive great white tearing through a U.S. Coast Guard crew off California to a diver trapped in a Fijian wreck while a hammerhead circled in the dark, in this video, you'll witness 6 of the most harrowing shark encounters ever recorded. On November 12, 2023, under a blanket of thick fog off the central California coast, the 47-foot Coast Guard patrol vessel Protector cut silently through the dark water, its running lights dimmed and its radar sweeping through the dense mist. The sea was calm but uneasy, its surface shifting in long, heavy swells that made the deck tilt beneath the crew's boots. Chief Petty Officer Dylan McCarthy, 36, moved along the starboard side with his gloved hand gripping the wet railing, checking the secured lines that trembled slightly as the boat rolled. Petty Officer Luis Ramirez, 29, stood near the stern adjusting the deck lights, and Ensign Noah Harper, 25, monitored the radar, his eyes scanning for signs of small craft that might be in distress. It was a routine patrol, the kind they had done countless times before. Yet something about that night felt wrong. The silence of the ocean, the smell of salt and diesel in the air, the muffled hum of the engine beneath their feet. The fog was so dense it blurred the horizon completely, turning the ocean into an endless gray void. The men spoke little, their focus on the job, each movement deliberate and methodical. When a low metallic creak echoed from beneath the hull, Dylan paused, frowning as the sound grew louder, followed by a sudden thud that made the entire vessel shudder. The men looked toward the water, but all they could see was the pale reflection of their deck lights on the surface. Seconds later, a deafening crash tore through the night as something massive struck the hull broadside, throwing Dylan off balance and sending Harper sprawling across the deck. Ramirez gripped the railing, his eyes wide as another violent impact tilted the boat sharply to port, seawater sloshing across the deck in cold sheets. Dylan pushed himself upright, his shoulder aching, and peered over the side. A huge shadow moved just beneath the surface, circling fast. The next hit came from below, an explosive surge of power that lifted the bow and dropped it again with a thunderous splash. The air filled with the sound of snapping metal and tearing rope as the Predator rammed the vessel again and again, using its sheer mass and momentum like a battering ram. Water poured over the deck, sweeping gear and crates toward the railing. Harper scrambled to secure a loose line, but before he could reach it, the surface erupted in a white blur of foam and teeth. The great white lunged from the blackness, jaws gaping wide enough to swallow half a man whole, and slammed onto the deck's edge, snapping at the air with feral speed before sliding back into the water. Ramirez shouted, grabbing a handrail as the boat rocked violently. Dylan could only glimpse flashes, a tail fin cutting through the spray, the gleam of its back as it rolled beneath them, the sudden, unnatural silence between impacts. Then came another blow, harder than before, splintering part of the starboard railing and throwing Ramirez off his feet. He slid across the wet deck toward the gap, trying to grab hold of something. But the shark came again, a white blur bursting upward through the mist and water, its head colliding with the side of the boat. The impact sent a geyser of seawater high into the air. Ramirez's body vanished in that chaos, pulled under so fast it was as if he had never been there at all. The water turned red in seconds. Dylan froze, heart hammering as the realization hit. The shark wasn't leaving, it was hunting them. The Predator circled back, drawn by the vibration of the engine and the scent of blood that now mixed with diesel on the wind. Harper staggered to the stern, his leg bleeding from where the railing had struck him. He reached for the emergency flare case when the shark attacked again, this time breaching fully beside the boat, its body slamming down with bone-cracking force. The impact knocked Harper backward into the churning sea. Dylan lunged to grab him but missed by inches. In the weak glow of the deck light, he saw the ensign's body twist in the water as the great white surged up beneath him, jaws closing around his torso in a violent flash of white foam and red spray. Harper's scream was lost to the roar of the sea. Then there was nothing, just the sound of the waves and the heavy thrum of the engine idling. The attack had lasted barely 3 minutes. Yet the boat was already half flooded, its stern low in the water, and equipment scattered across the deck. Dylan crouched behind a broken crate, gripping the slick metal as the hull groaned beneath another pass. The shark brushed along the underside, its tail fin scraping the boat before it vanished into the fog. He waited, trembling, his breath coming in shallow bursts, salt water dripping from his face. He knew the shark could strike again at any moment, but the silence stretched long and unbearable. Somewhere out in that gray darkness, the predator circled, listening, watching, deciding whether to return. When the next impact came, it was smaller, more cautious. A test, not a full strike. The great white bumped the hull once, twice, then disappeared again. Dylan stayed still, afraid to move or make a sound. He had seen the power in those few seconds, how easily the creature had dismantled steel and taken men trained for rescue and survival, as if they were nothing. Eventually, the shark drifted away, fading into the deep. The only movement left was the slow sway of the crippled boat, its lights flickering weakly through the fog. As the sun rose over the Pacific that morning, Dylan stared out at the quiet horizon, the fog burning away to reveal the endless expanse of gray-blue water. Somewhere below, the shark moved unseen, still part of that deep and merciless world. For the Coast Guard, it became one of the deadliest maritime attacks in recent history. 3 minutes of chaos that turned a routine patrol into a nightmare no one could have imagined. On January 22, 2025, under the oppressive heat of the Queensland summer, the small clearing beside the Coen River shimmered in the midday light, the air thick with humidity, and the steady hum of insects rising from the mangroves. Ethan Parker, 27, Sophia Reyes, 26, and Marcus Liu, 28, had driven hours from Cairns to escape the crowds and find a place to cool off, guided by a rough dirt track that wound through the scrub before opening onto a secluded bend in the river. The water there was calm, its surface stained deep brown by the tannins of fallen leaves, and a thick rope hung from the branch of an old paperbark tree, swaying gently in the hot wind. The friends unpacked their cooler, stripped down to their swimwear, and laughed as they tested the swing, its frayed end cutting through the air before splashing into the still opaque river below. The first jump sent a plume of muddy water skyward, and the ripples spread out across the bend, disturbing schools of small fish that darted just beneath the surface. Ethan climbed the bank again, gripping the rope with both hands and launching himself out in a smooth arc, shouting with exhilaration as he dropped into the brown current. Sophia followed, fearless and grinning, while Marcus waited his turn, taking a sip of water and wiping the sweat from his neck. The river felt almost alive, its faint movement against the mangrove roots barely noticeable but constant. And though none of them realized it, that same movement carried vibrations far downstream, reaching a predator that had been patrolling the murky channel for days. Bull sharks were well known in Queensland's rivers, their ability to tolerate fresh water giving them access to creeks, estuaries, and even inland waterways. The shark that lingered that day was a large female, nearly 3 meters long and heavy-bodied, moving slowly against the current with powerful tailstrokes. It had followed the faint metallic tang of fish stirred by the swimmer's splashes, its small black eyes adjusting to the dim water. The river, quiet and thick with silt, muffled all sound but magnified vibration, and the shark began to rise toward the surface where the noise of laughter and impact grew sharper. Marcus finally took the rope in his hands, stepping back and feeling it tighten under his weight. Ethan and Sophia cheered as he swung high, legs extended, before dropping into the river with a clean, heavy splash. The instant his body hit the water, the predator reacted, a dark shadow accelerating upward through the sediment cloud, its blunt snout cutting through the gloom. The impact came less than a second later, a violent upward strike that knocked Marcus off balance and sent a shock through his entire body. The shark's upper jaw grazed his thigh, its rough skin tearing flesh as easily as sandpaper on silk, before it twisted and vanished again into the clouded depths. Marcus surfaced with a shout, flailing, blood already swirling around his leg in dark ribbons. Ethan and Sophia rushed to the edge, calling his name as he tried to swim back, the water around him churning in bursts of movement. The shark returned, drawn now by the scent, its motion faster and more deliberate. It struck from below, not a full bite this time, but a ramming blow that sent a wave across the river and forced Marcus under again. When he reappeared, his face was pale, his breath ragged, and the current pulled him toward the center of the bend. Ethan waded in up to his waist, then thought better of it as a flash of gray fin broke the surface just meters away. The sight froze him, every instinct screaming to run, yet he couldn't abandon his friend. Sophia grabbed a long branch and extended it toward Marcus, urging him to reach for it while staying on the dry bank. The shark's dorsal fin sliced through the water again, closer this time, circling, waiting. Marcus kicked frantically, pushing himself toward the muddy slope until his fingers brushed the branch, gripping it tight as Sophia and Ethan hauled him in with all their strength. The riverbank was slick, and the suction of the mud made every pull exhausting. Behind them, the water erupted once more, the bull shark breaching just enough to reveal its jaws, snapping at the retreating shape before falling back with a heavy splash. The three collapsed on the bank, panting, mud and blood mixing beneath them. Marcus's thigh was torn open, deep but not fatal. The skin around it shredded from contact with the shark's abrasive hide. His body trembled from shock, salt and sweat burning in the wound, but he was alive. The predator lingered nearby, circling the bend, its fin occasionally cutting through the surface before fading into the murky distance. None of them dared move until the ripples vanished completely, the surface once again still beneath the harsh glare of the afternoon sun. When they finally made it back to the truck, Marcus was barely conscious, his wound wrapped in a makeshift bandage torn from a towel. Ethan drove the rough dirt track as fast as he could, the tires sliding in patches of loose sand, while Sophia pressed down on the bleeding leg, whispering reassurances he could barely hear. They reached a rural medical outpost nearly an hour later, where doctors stabilized Marcus before airlifting him to a hospital in Cairns. He survived, though the muscle damage left him with a permanent limp and deep scars that traced the memory of that strike. Marine authorities later confirmed the presence of multiple large bull sharks in the Coen River that season, likely drawn inland by heavy rains that had flooded the estuary and carried fish deep into the freshwater channels. The attack was classified as provoked only by circumstance, the splashing, the noise, the chance encounter between predator and people in an environment that had always belonged to the shark first. In the months that followed, the old rope swing was cut down, its frayed end still hanging briefly from the paper bark before it fell into the river and disappeared beneath the silt. Locals avoided that stretch of water afterward, calling it cursed, though those who knew the truth understood it was nothing mystical at all, just nature reminding them of its quiet, merciless balance. On December 3, 2023, the late afternoon sun glared across the turquoise water off Queensland's Whitsunday coast, where the shallow lagoon stretched out like a mirror under the sky. The air shimmered with heat, the wind carrying the faint scent of salt and gasoline from the speedboat's wake. Ethan Cole, 24, stood balanced on his wakeboard, rope handle clenched tightly in both hands, his body leaning against the pull of the boat as he cut through the rolling swells. Each turn sent a spray of seawater glinting like glass shards in the sun. His laughter carried faintly over the hum of the engine. It was perfect weather, clear skies, calm waves, and the illusion of safety that always came with such beauty. Beneath the surface, however, the water was not still. Far below, the pale blue turned to green, then to a murky gray, where a tiger shark moved with deliberate grace. Nearly 4 meters long, thick-bodied and striped faintly along its flanks, it was a predator built for power and patience. It had been prowling the lagoon for hours, following the scent of baitfish stirred up by passing boats and drawn by the rhythmic splashes from above. To the shark, those vibrations were the erratic thumps of struggling prey, an irresistible pattern in the endless quiet of the reef channel. The creature turned slowly, its tail slicing through the water with lazy precision, before it began its ascent toward the surface. Ethan didn't notice the faint change in the water's texture, the subtle shift in color beneath him. He only felt the speed, the wind against his face, the pull of the line tightening as he cut back sharply across the wake. The boat driver, an experienced friend named Tyler Webb, throttled slightly, guiding the curve with practiced ease. Behind them, the wake foamed white and rolled outward, masking the faint shadow that rose from the deep. Ethan leaned into another jump, launching from the crest of a wave and landing hard, the board slapping the surface with a hollow thud. The sound traveled downward like a signal flare in the silence below. The shark accelerated. In less than a second, the tranquil rhythm shattered. The water beneath Ethan erupted in an explosion of foam and muscle, a dark shape surging upward with terrifying force. The tiger shark struck from below, jaws open wide, its head slamming into Ethan's lower body with a power that bent the board beneath him. He felt the impact before the pain, a violent pull that tore him off his feet and wrenched the handle from his hands. The rope snapped taut behind the boat as he was yanked under, bubbles and blood spiraling together in a cloud. Tyler heard the splash and looked back, confused for a heartbeat before realizing Ethan was gone. He cut the throttle and turned hard, circling back toward the floating wakeboard, the water behind it swirling red. For an instant, Ethan surfaced, gasping, his leg thrashing weakly. The shark had its lower left leg in its jaws, shaking violently side to side, a motion so fast and brutal that it sent a plume of crimson across the shallows. Tyler shouted for help, slamming the throttle forward to reach him, but the predator twisted again, dragging Ethan beneath the surface in a blur of froth and blood. The lagoon fell silent except for the rumble of the idling engine and the muffled slap of waves against the hull. The other riders, who had been waiting their turn farther out, began speeding toward the scene on their jet skis, their wakes cutting across the smooth water. As they arrived, the sea looked deceptively calm again, the only evidence of what had happened being the floating board, a torn life vest, and a widening stain of red that spread beneath the rippling surface. No one could see the shark. It had vanished as swiftly as it had appeared, retreating to the deeper channel beyond the sandbar, its instincts satisfied, its hunger momentarily quieted. Tyler leaned over the edge of the boat, scanning the water for any sign of his friend, his hands shaking as he shouted Ethan's name into the wind. Then, just 20 meters away, a shape appeared. Ethan, motionless, drifting face down, the current slowly pushing him toward the reef edge. Tyler dove in without thinking, pulling him back to the boat, his arms burning with effort as he heaved the limp body onto the deck. The damage was catastrophic. Ethan's lower leg was gone below the knee, the remaining flesh shredded by the shark's serrated teeth. His skin was pale, his pulse weak and fading, and though Tyler tried to staunch the bleeding with a torn towel, the loss of blood was too severe. By the time they reached the shore, Ethan's heart had stopped. Marine investigators who later examined the scene concluded the attack had likely been the result of mistaken identity. The shark, drawn by the vibration of the wakeboard and the splashes from its landing, had interpreted the movement as that of a wounded turtle or large fish. The lagoon where the incident occurred had long been known for its occasional tiger shark sightings, especially during late spring and early summer, when the animals followed warm currents toward the coast to hunt. It was rare for them to strike humans, but when they did, the power and speed of the attack left little chance for escape. In the following weeks, local authorities posted warnings along the beaches and temporarily banned recreational water sports in that part of the coast. Divers reported seeing the same large female tiger shark still patrolling the outer edge of the lagoon, her slow movements betraying no trace of aggression, only the calm precision of a creature perfectly adapted to survival. For those who had been there that day, the memory of Ethan's final moments never faded. The sunlight on the water, the flash of white foam, the scream cut short. It had all happened in seconds, a perfect day shattered by the raw force of nature's most efficient hunter. The lagoon returned to its usual quiet, but for everyone who had watched, it would never look peaceful again. On August 14, 2024, as the morning tide rose along the Belizean coast, the dense mangroves of the Siti River estuary glimmered under a haze of golden sunlight. The water crept higher between the roots, turning the forest floor into a maze of shallow channels alive with darting mullet and rippling reflections. Jake Thompson, 31, skimmed across the surface on his wing foil board, weaving through the labyrinth with practiced ease. The air smelled of salt and decaying vegetation, heavy and still, and each gust of wind sent his foil cutting smoothly through the brackish shallows. He loved these early sessions, the solitude, the quiet challenge of the mangroves, the sense of being surrounded by life yet completely alone. That morning the water was unusually high, having flooded the mangrove flats and concealed many of the twisted roots beneath the surface due to recent rains. Jake knew the dangers of the area: crocodiles, stingrays, and even the occasional shark that followed fish into the flooded channels. However, blacktips were common and usually harmless, quickly fleeing from human presence. With his foil slicing across the muddy water, Jake focused on balance and wind angle, his legs flexing against the rhythm of each small chop. The tide lapped at the mangrove trunks, carrying debris, bubbles, and flashes of silver fish darting from shadow to light. It looked peaceful, deceptively so. As Jake banked into a turn, the tip of his foil caught something unseen. The jolt was instantaneous, sending him pitching forward off the board. His body hit the water hard, driving the breath from his lungs. When he surfaced, sputtering, he reached instinctively for the board that drifted just beyond arm's reach, rocking on the surface. The current tugged at his legs, and in that moment of disorientation he noticed movement beneath him. A quick, sleek shape darting through the brown water. The faint outline of a black-tipped shark passed under his feet, its distinctive dorsal fin cutting briefly through the surface before vanishing again. At first, Jake assumed it would leave as usual, startled by the splash, but the predator turned sharply, looping back with unsettling precision. It was not fleeing, it was investigating. The water around him felt suddenly tighter, darker, and he froze, heart pounding as he searched for the faint movement below. The shark reappeared, gliding just beneath his legs, close enough for him to see the silver-gray flash of its flank before it veered upward. The attack was quick and almost silent. A snap of movement, a surge of displaced water, and the sting of teeth grazing his calf. Jake jerked back, pain radiating up his leg as blood clouded the shallows in a pink spiral. He kicked instinctively, the movement only agitating the predator further. The shark circled again, its speed increasing, weaving in and out of the mangrove roots with the agility of something that belonged there far more than he did. It darted close, bumping the foil board as it drifted beside him, its rough skin scraping the underside. The board rocked violently, its wing foil catching on a submerged branch. Jake swam toward it, teeth gritted, his injured leg throbbing as he pulled himself up onto the unsteady platform. The shark struck again, not biting this time but colliding with the board's fin, the impact strong enough to nearly knock him off. Water splashed across his face, his breath shallow and ragged. The mangrove maze around him seemed endless, every dark shadow beneath the surface a possible strike. The shark moved relentlessly below, quick flashes of gray slicing through the water. Jake crouched low, trying to keep his balance as the foil bobbed in the current. Each time he shifted weight, the board tilted dangerously, and the shark reacted instantly, rushing toward the movement. The predator's sleek form brushed the edge of the board again, testing, its dorsal fin cutting a line through the murk. The sharp metallic scent of blood spread around him, carried by the slow drift of the tide. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Jake tried to stay still, every muscle tight, heart pounding against his ribs. The shark circled in tighter loops, then darted between the roots, jaws snapping at small fish that fled from the commotion. For one tense moment it disappeared completely, and he dared to hope it had moved on, until the board suddenly jolted upward as the shark slammed it from below. Jake clung to the handle, nearly losing his grip as the force pushed him toward the tangle of branches. He used one hand to steady himself against a root, pulling the board closer and trying to create distance from the open water. The black tip made another pass, grazing the foil wing, then slowed, drifting sideways, its tail flicking lazily. It circled one last time, then turned toward the deeper channel beyond the mangroves. Slowly it disappeared, its shape fading into the darker green where the tide pulled stronger. Jake waited, breathing hard, afraid to move until the last ripple faded. His calf burned, the shallow cut leaking steady streams of blood that colored the brown water beneath him. He checked the wound, not deep but ragged, with teeth marks along one side. The realization of how close he had come hit him all at once, leaving his limbs shaking with adrenaline. When he finally paddled toward the shore, each motion of his leg sent a pulse of pain through his body. The mangrove roots brushed against his board, and every shadow seemed alive, every sound magnified. He reached the muddy edge and half-crawled onto solid ground, collapsing beside the tangle of branches with his foil beside him. Sweat and salt water dripped into his eyes, his breath shallow and uneven. The silence of the mangroves returned. Distant bird calls, the faint rustle of leaves, and the steady hum of insects as if nothing had happened. Jake wrapped his leg with a spare cloth from his pack, then waited for the bleeding to slow before limping back through the trees toward the road where his truck was parked. That day, in the calm, golden light of the Belizean mangroves, Jake had learned that even the most familiar waters could turn against him in seconds. The difference between serenity and terror reduced to the distance of a single heartbeat. On February 14, 2017, under a clear sky off the coast of Gansbai, South Africa, the sea stretched glassy and calm, touched by sunlight that shimmered across the swells. Liam Parker, 31, and Sophie Michaels, 29, leaned over the railing of their small white yacht, studying the movement of distant seals near Dyer Island. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind that made the ocean look harmless, its surface reflecting the stillness of a summer day. The air smelled of salt and diesel, the hum of the boat steady beneath their feet as they took photos of the seals gliding effortlessly across the blue expanse. But beneath that surface, a massive great white shark, nearly 5 meters long, cruised silently through the cold green water. It drew closer with the sound of movement and the faint scent of fish from the cooler stored below deck. Its black eyes turned upward, its pace slow and deliberate, its massive tail pushing it closer to the yacht's shadow. Liam set the camera down on a bench and stepped toward the railing again, bracing himself against a faint swell. The boat rocked slightly and the polished deck glistened under the sun, slick with salt spray. As he leaned forward, one foot slid, and the world seemed to slow as he lost his balance. His hand reached for the railing, fingers brushing the steel, but his grip slipped on the wet surface. In that brief, helpless moment before he could steady himself, the ocean below exploded. The great white surged upward, striking with a violent burst that shattered the stillness. The impact rocked the entire yacht as its head slammed into the hull, sending a shockwave through the vessel. Sophie screamed as water and foam sprayed across the deck. Liam hit the railing hard, and before he could recover, the predator's jaws broke the surface and clamped down, pulling him into the churning sea. The shark twisted and vanished beneath the waves, leaving only a froth of red and white water swirling near the boat's stern. Sophie scrambled backward, her legs slipping on the slick deck as she grabbed the side rail to steady herself. The sound of metal groaning filled the air as the shark rammed the hull again, its massive body scraping against the fiberglass, leaving deep gouges. The yacht tilted sharply to one side, seawater spilling across the floor, washing away the camera, the towels, and anything not tied down. For several seconds, the surface stilled again. Sophie stood frozen, drenched and trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Then the water erupted once more, the shark's dorsal fin slicing through the foam as it circled, drawn by motion and scent. Pieces of splintered railing floated near the bow. The predator brushed the hull with its snout, then disappeared beneath the stern again, the surface rippling as bubbles rose in its wake. Sophie clutched the rail, scanning the water for any sign of Liam, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The sea was a violent, restless blur of green and white, and the sun that had seemed so gentle now burned harshly overhead. The faint hum of the engine was the only sound left between waves. The yacht rocked and creaked, drifting slowly, its bow dipping with every roll. When the shark surfaced again, its head broke through a patch of foam near the stern. It slammed the damaged side once more, splintering another section of railing, sending Sophie stumbling to her knees. The predator's body brushed past the hull, its tail churning the water into chaos, before it dove again into the depths, leaving behind a fading trail of bubbles. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the sound of waves slapping against the boat. The water calmed, the white foam slowly dissipating into faint streaks. Sophie sat against the cabin wall, her breathing unsteady, blood trickling from a gash on her arm where she had struck a metal fitting. The deck was scattered with fragments of wood, twisted metal, and seawater mixed with streaks of crimson. When she finally rose, her legs trembled so badly she could barely stand. She stumbled toward the radio, fumbling for the microphone, but her hands were slippery and numb. Her voice cracked as she tried to call for help, static filling the air before she managed to get a signal out. The coastline shimmered faintly in the distance, unreachable and silent. Rescuers later described the damage as extensive. The yacht's railing shattered, its hull dented and streaked with deep gouges from the shark's rough skin and impact. Tools, clothing, and debris had been thrown across the deck, as if a storm had torn through. Sophie was found in shock, dehydrated and bruised, her words scattered but consistent. She spoke of how the shark had struck 3 times with speed and precision that left no room for escape. Experts who examined the scene concluded that the great white's aggression was likely triggered by confusion or territorial behavior, intensified by the sound of splashing and the yacht's size. Encounters like these, they said, are rare but not impossible near Gansbai's rich feeding grounds, where seals and fish attract some of the world's largest great whites. What began as a calm, sunlit afternoon on February 14, 2017, had turned into a violent test of survival, and in just moments a peaceful day had descended into chaos, leaving one survivor adrift and one life taken by the unrelenting power of the sea's most feared predator. On August 12, 2021, beneath a calm turquoise surface off the coast of Fiji, the world fell silent at a depth of 30 meters, where light dimmed and color shifted into muted shades of blue and green. Experienced diver Isla Moreno, 33, drifted steadily toward the skeletal outline of a sunken freighter resting on the sea floor. The vessel, rusted and half consumed by coral and seaweed, had been lost decades earlier, its collapsed structure forming shadowed tunnels and twisted corridors that lured explorers into its depths. For Isla, it was the perfect blend of danger and discovery, a place where nature had reclaimed what man had once built. She moved with practiced precision, bubbles rising rhythmically as her fins brushed silt from the metal floor. The visibility flickered, a haze of floating debris and sand that seemed to pulse with each movement. She adjusted her buoyancy, hovering near a gaping opening in the hull, its edges jagged like the teeth of some ancient beast. A faint current whispered through, carrying particles that drifted in her light beam like falling ash. Inside the wreck, narrow corridors twisted around fallen beams and mangled equipment. Schools of small fish darted between rusted pipes, vanishing whenever her flashlight passed. She followed a passage deeper in, recording fragments of the ship with her mounted camera, her breathing slow but alert. The deeper she went, the darker it became, the sense of confinement growing with every turn. The silence pressed in like a weight, broken only by the steady hiss of her regulator. As she rounded a corner, her right fin snagged. She twisted gently, expecting it to come loose, but the blade had caught on a narrow strand of corroded steel, twisted into a hook by decades of decay. She pulled harder, and the metal groaned faintly, holding her in place. A sharp edge scraped her ankle through the neoprene, sending a sting of pain through her leg. Then the light changed. From the darkness ahead, a shadow glided past the wreck's entrance. Large, slow, deliberate. Isla froze, instinctively lowering her flashlight. The beam wavered over a pale, flat shape that drifted closer, its wide head sweeping from side to side with a motion that was both graceful and unnervingly deliberate. A massive hammerhead shark, nearly 4 meters long, moved toward her with calm, purposeful curiosity. Its body filled the passage, its movement stirring the silt into a faint cloud that drifted between them. The shark turned, its dark eyes fixed on the faint sound of her regulator. Isla held her breath instinctively before realizing her mistake and forced herself to exhale slowly, bubbles rising against the ceiling of the wreck. The creature moved closer, its wide head brushing against her shoulder tank with a dull metallic clang. It circled once, slow and precise, its snout grazing her camera rig, causing it to spin slightly on its mount. Her pulse hammered in her chest as she tried to free her fin without sudden movement. The shark passed again, brushing her oxygen tank hard enough to knock her against the jagged wall. Rusted fragments of metal rattled loose, scattering downward in a faint cloud. She reached back, gripping the twisted beam, but her glove slipped on the rough surface. When she pulled again, her fin tore slightly, but it was still wedged tight. The shark returned, slower this time, gliding directly beneath her. Its dorsal fin scraped faintly against the rusted ceiling, its flank close enough that she could see the rough texture of its skin, marked with small scars. It turned, its snout nudging her tank once more before its teeth grazed the side of her shoulder. Not deep, but sharp enough to send a flash of pain radiating down her arm. The contact startled her into a hard pull that finally snapped the corroded wire holding her in place. She kicked upward instinctively, pushing toward the opening above. The movement stirred the silt violently, clouding the space in thick, swirling dust that turned everything into shifting gray fog. Through it, she caught glimpses of the hammerhead circling again, its movements methodical and eerily calm, as if assessing her. The confined metal walls amplified her own breathing until it felt deafening, every hiss echoing like a warning. The shark turned again, passing behind her as she tried to navigate through the tangled beams. It bumped the side of the wreck with its snout, a low metallic thud vibrating through the structure. She floated upward through the haze, heart pounding. her flashlight beam cutting across a narrow escape route toward open water. The predator drifted closer one last time, head tilting slightly, before it suddenly veered away, vanishing into the dark blue beyond the wreck. For a long moment, Isla hovered in silence, suspended between the shadows and the fading outline of the shark. Her shoulder throbbed where its teeth had grazed her, and her fin flapped loosely from the torn strap. She steadied her breathing and began the slow ascent, bubbles rising in steady columns toward the faint shimmer of the surface. The wreck faded below her, half lost in clouds of disturbed silt, its jagged silhouette swallowing the last trace of movement. When she broke the surface, sunlight seemed almost unreal after the cold, dark depths below. The dive boat bobbed quietly nearby, its hull rocking with the waves. Isla pulled herself aboard, collapsing onto the deck, her hands trembling as she removed her mask. Blood had seeped faintly through her wetsuit, the wound shallow but raw. She sat there in silence, staring at the endless ocean, trying to process what had just happened, how something so calm, so deliberate, had nearly trapped her in the dark. Later, marine specialists explained that hammerhead sharks are known for their intelligence and heightened sensory abilities, often investigating unfamiliar objects or vibrations before striking. In the confined space of a wreck, that curiosity becomes far more dangerous, as escape routes vanish and each movement can provoke a response. What began as a serene dive on August 12, 2021, had turned into a tense, claustrophobic struggle against one of the ocean's most methodical hunters. Beneath the wreck's shadow, Isla had learned how easily curiosity, both hers and the predator's, could turn exploration into survival.